Recording.
Yes. Welcome to 21st National Regional Science Congress. Dear participants, I would like to send you the actually the confirmation form due to the recording and put it on the YouTube. So I sent you to the owners of the abstracts and the presenters the confirmation form, and they accepted, but we are waiting for the Valentin, and he is here. And so Professor Dr. Tizim Baycan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the sixth session of our Congress. The topic of this session is the regional competitiveness, and we have foreign participants also for this session. I would like to thank them for joining us, and I would like to tell also welcome to our National Congress, and I hope next time we can host you in Inside Congress, face to face. We can be together. So I would like to start immediately our session. We have 4 papers, and for each paper we have 15 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for discussion. I would like to keep the discussion at the end of the session in order to have, let's say, to save time also for presentations. Please, you can write your questions using the chat platform, but later on also at the end of the presentations, you can raise your questions to our speakers. Now I would like to give the floor to first paper presenter, Gamze Mestan. And the paper's title is Factors Affecting Regional Distribution of Investments with Regional Incentives. The abstract is in English, but Gamze will present the paper in Turkish. Okay, Gamze, the floor is yours.
Tamam, paylaşıyorum ben sunumu. Şu an gözüküyor herhalde.
Evet.
Herkese merhaba. Ben Gamze Mestan. İstanbul Teknik Üniversitesi Şehir Bölge Planlama bölümünde araştırma görevlisiyim. Bu çalışmayı da Sayın Profesör Doktor Ali Ahu Akın Hocam'la birlikte hazırladık. Konumuz bölgesel teşvikli yatırımların dağılımını etkileyen faktörler. Bu sunum kapsamında öncelikle sizlere araştırma çerçevemizi aktardıktan sonra yatırım teşvik politikası ile alakalı kuramsal çerçeve, tanım, amaç ve türlerden bahsedeceğim. Ardından da Türkiye'deki yatırım teşvik politikasını inceleyeceğiz. Son olarak da bizim bu çalışma kapsamında yürüttüğümüz bölgesel teşvikli yatırımların dağılımının incelenmesine yönelik ampirik analizimizi ve bu analize yönelik değerlendirmelerimizi sunacağım. Biz bu çalışmada aslında temel sorumuz bölgesel teşvikli yatırımların bölgelere dağılımında etkili olan faktörler nelerdir sorusuyla yola çıktık ve çalışmanın kapsam olarak bölgesel teşvik uygulaması kapsamında gerçekleştirilen teşvikli yatırımların bölgelere dağılımının incelemeyi ve bu dağılımı etkileyen faktörleri tespit etmeyi amaçladık ve böylelikle de Türkiye'deki bölgesel teşvik politikasını değerlendirmeyi ana hedefimiz olarak belirledik. Yöntem olarak öncelikle bir yatırım teşvik politikaları ile alakalı literatür taraması yaptıktan sonra il düzeyinde bölgesel teşvik yatırımların dağılımını etkileyebilecek sosyoekonomik faktörleri panel veri analizi yöntemiyle analiz ettik. Yatırım teşvik politikasının kuramsal çerçevesine değinecek olursak, iktisadi ekoller aslında devletin ekonomiye müdahalesiyle alakalı farklı görüşler ileri sürüyorlar ve teşvikler de aslında devletin ekonomiye müdahale araçlarından biri olduğu için farklı görüşler ortaya atılmış. Örneğin neoklasik ekonomide büyümenin aracı olarak, önemli bir amacı olarak fiziksel sermaye birikimi kabul edilmiş. Ancak tasarrufların yatırıma dönüşmesi otomatik varsayılmış. Asıl 1929 krizinden sonra devletin ekonomiye müdahalesi gündeme gelmesinin ardından Keynesyen ekonomistlere göre aslında mali politika aracı olarak teşvikler ortaya atılmış. Alternatif iktisat ekollerinde de teşviklerden bahsediliyor. Örneğin içsel büyüme ekolü ya da kurumsal iktisat ekolünde devletin ekonomiye müdahalesinde teşvikler kalkınmada önemli bir araç olarak görülüyor. Aynı şekilde hala günümüzde de ne kadar serbest piyasa ekonomisi benimsenmiş gibi gözükse de devletler teşvik politikalarını sürdürüyorlar. Ana bir tanım olarak OECD'nin yatırım teşviği tanımına bakacak olursak, bir yatırımın maliyetini veya potansiyel karını etkileyerek veya yatırımla ilgili riskleri değiştirerek yatırımın büyüklüğünü, bölgesini ve sektörünü etkilemek için hazırlanan hükümet önlemleri diyebiliriz. Tabii ülkelerin ekonomi politikalarına göre, zamana göre bunun içeriği ve nedenleri değişiklik gösteriyor. Fakat ana amaç ekonomik büyümeyi ve kalkınmayı sağlayarak bölgesel gelişmişlik farklarını azaltmak ve stratejik öneme sahip bölgelere ve sektörlere kaynak aktarılması. Teşviklerin amacı da gelişmekte olan ve gelişmiş ülkelere göre farklılık gösteriyor. Yani gelişmekte olan ülkelerde daha çok ekonomiye yönelik, ekonominin gelişmesine yönelik teşvikler hedeflenirken gelişmiş ülkelerde bir tık daha sosyal ayağını aslında görüyoruz. Teşvik politikalarının uygulanış biçimi olarak 3 farklı şekilde görüyoruz. Bölgesel teşvik, sektörel teşvik, ürün teşviği. Hızlıca bahsedecek olursam, bölgesel teşvik bir bölgenin kalkınmasına yönelik verilen desteklerdir ve bunun ana amacı bölgelerin arasındaki gelişmişlik farklarını azaltmaktır. Sektörel teşvikler ise devlet tarafından belirlenen sektörlere yönelik verilen teşviklerdir. Ürün teşviği dediğimiz ise de üretim potansiyeli yüksek olan ve markalaşma istenen ürünlere yönelik verilen desteklerdir diyebiliriz. Türkiye'de yatırım teşvik politikalarını inceleyecek olursak, aslında bizim yatırım teşviğin ülkemizde gündeme gelmesi 1923 yılında düzenlenen İzmir İktisat Kongresi ile başlıyor. Ancak uygulama ayağı tam olarak planlı dönemden sonra diyebiliriz, 1960 ve sonrasında. 6 dönemde inceledim ama burada hızlıca önemli olanları değineceğim. Bizim için önemli olan şey DPT'nin, Devlet Planlama Teşkilatı'nın kurulmasının ardından 1968'deki teşvik belgesi uygulaması. Hemen ardından da şu anki bölgesel teşvik sistemimizin ilk aşaması olarak kabul edebileceğimiz kalkınmada öncelikli yöre uygulaması. Yani az gelişmiş, belirli göstergelere göre az gelişmiş illere bir tık fazla teşvik vererek bu bölgelere yatırım çekmek hedefleniyor. Daha sonra kalkınmada öncelikli yöre kalkıyor ortadan ve 2009'da sosyoekonomik gelişmişlik kademelenmesi çalışmasına göre iller 4 bölgeye ayrılıyor ve bunlara yönelik teşvikler veriliyor. 2012'de de yeni bir güncelleme yapılıyor ve 4 olan bölge sayısı 6'ya çıkarılıyor ve aslında şu anda da günümüzde 2012'de yürürlüğe giren yatırımlarda devlet yardımları hakkındaki karar kapsamında belirlenen teşvik sistemi hala mevcut. Bu teşvik sisteminde de 5'ti önceden, fakat şu an 4 güncel olarak 4 adet teşvik uygulaması bulunuyor. Bunlar bölgesel teşvik uygulamaları, öncelikli yatırım konularına yönelik teşvikler, stratejik yatırımlar ve genel teşvik uygulamaları diyebilirim. Bu çalışmamız kapsamında dikkate aldığımız bölgesel teşvik sisteminden bahsedecek olursak da, bu başta da dediğim gibi bu teşviklerin bölgelere yatırımların kaydırılarak bölgeler arasındaki gelişmişlik farklarını azaltmak. 2017'de Sosyoekonomik Gelişmişlik Endeksi çalışmasına göre Türkiye'deki iller 6 bölgeye ayrılıyor ve en az gelişmiş iller dediğimiz, genelde ülkemizin doğusunda yer alan iller 6. kademede. Gelişmiş dediğimiz iller ise 1. kademede yer alıyor. Gördüğümüz gibi bu tabloda da destek unsurlarını bölgelere göre, yani bölge kademesi arttıkça verilen destekler artıyor. Böylelikle de aslında ana amaç az gelişmiş bölgelere daha fazla yatırım çekmek. Burada Sanayi ve Teknoloji Bakanlığı tarafından yayınlanan teşvikli yatırım istatistikleri kapsamında bazı verileri inceledik 2009 ve 2019 yılları arasında baz alarak. Teşvikli yatırımların destek sınıfına göre dağılımını incelediğimizde bu yıllar arasında en fazla bölgesel teşvik yatırımlarının desteklendiğini görüyoruz %47 oranla. Daha sonra da genel teşvik destekleri geliyor. Daha sonra da stratejik yatırımlar geliyor. Teşvikli yatırımların teşvik bölgelerine dağılımını incelediğimizde de en fazla teşviğin %46 ile birinci bölgede yoğunlaştığını görüyoruz. En az teşvik alan bölgede 6. bölge. Yani aslında destek sunumuyla tamamen zıt bir dağılım görüyoruz burada. Yani 6. bölge daha fazla teşvik alırken yatırımın bu bölgelerde daha az gerçekleştiğini görüyoruz. Sektörel dağılıma da baktığımızda en fazla %41 ile imalat, daha sonra da %30 ile hizmetler sektörü ön plana çıkıyor. En az teşvik yatırımın gerçekleştiği sektör ise %1 ile tarım sektörü diyebiliriz. Benim ekran paylaşımım mı durdu hocam? Şu an gözüküyor mu?
Evet, ekran, evet. Paylaşımımız durmuştu, şimdi geldi.
Dondu şu anda. Şu an ilerledi değil mi?
Evet.
Tamam. Daha sonra, daha sonra birinci bölge ve 6. bölgeyi iki uç bölge olarak ele alıp aynı verilere bakmaya çalıştık. Birinci bölgede de en çok bölgesel destek alan teşviklerin, yatırımların gerçekleştiğini görüyoruz. Sektör olarak da yine imalat ve hizmetler sektörü ön planda diyebiliriz. 6. bölgede yine aynı şekilde %54 ile bölgesel destek sınıfında yatırımlar desteklenmiş. %45 ile de genel teşvik uygulamasından faydalanılmış. Sektöre baktığımızda bu sefer 6. bölgede enerji sektörünün %69 ile ön planda olduğunu görüyoruz. Tarım sektörünün de %0 küsurat olduğu için burada tam gözükmemiş, ancak en az da tarım sektörüne yönelik yatırımların yapıldığını görüyoruz. Ampirik analizimize geçecek olursak da biz bu çalışma kapsamında düzey 3 il bölgelerini esas alarak 2009 ve 2019 yılları arasında 10 yıllık bir dönemde belirlediğimiz veri setiyle panel veri analizi gerçekleştirdik. Veri setimiz tabloda görüldüğü gibi, yani ekonomik, beşeri sermaye ve teknoloji başlıkları altında bazı göstergeler belirledik. Bağımlı değişken olarak da teşvikli yatırım türlerini tutarını ele aldık. Ekonomik değişkenlerimiz kişi başı gelir, banka kredileri, ihracat tutarı, beşeri sermaye kapsamında aldığımız göstergelerimiz nüfus yoğunluğu, eğitim, iş gücü verileri. Teknolojik olarak da araştırma ve geliştirme ile patent verilerini dikkate aldık. Hızlıca bir verilerimize şöyle bir bakacak olursak, teşvikli sabit yatırım tutarlarının aslında tüm bölgelerde zaman içerisinde artış gösterirken hala birinci bölgede yoğunlaştığını görüyoruz. İl bazında incelediğimizde de sağ üstteki haritada yine gördüğümüz üzere birinci teşvik bölgesine yer alan, gelişmiş ve ülkenin batısında bulunan illerde yoğunlaştığını görüyoruz. Bu da zaten alttaki sosyoekonomik gelişim haritayla oldukça paralel gözüktüğü üzere. Diğer sosyoekonomik verilerimize baktığımızda yine aslında kişi başı gelirde de kişi başına düşen banka kredisi tutarı, ihracat tutarı ya da sigortalı çalışan yüzdesi. Bunlarda da birinci bölge ile 6. bölge arasında oldukça fark olduğunu görüyoruz. Devam edersek sigortalı imalat çalışanı oranında da 6. bölge geride. Bir tek sigortalı tarım çalışanı oranı bir tık daha aslında ters bir etki görüyoruz bunda. Tarım istihdamından dolayı, bu da bölgesel farklılaşmasından kaynaklı olarak. Ar-Ge merkezi sayısında yine çok uç bir fark gözüküyor ya da lisans ve üstü eğitim kurumlarından mezun sayısını da aynı şekilde. Son olarak bunu bir değerlendirecek olursam verilerimize, teşvik bölgelerinde birinci bölgede olan iller ile 6. bölgedeki iller arasında çok göze çarpan bir sosyoekonomik gelişmişlik farkı olduğunu görüyoruz. Ve bu verilerimizle bir panel analizi yapmadan önce verilerimizi önce birim kök durağanlığını test etmek için bazı birim kök testleri gerçekleştirdik ve yaptığımız test sonuçlarına göre de veri setinde herhangi bir birim köke rastlamadık. Daha sonra 3 adet model kullandık panel veri analizimizde. Fixed Effects, Random Effects ve First Difference model kullandık ve seçimimizi Hausman testini yaptıktan sonra sabit etkiler modelinde karar kıldık. Ve daha sonra sabit etkiler modeline de aynı şekilde bir otokorelasyon varlığını test etmek ya da değişen varyan sorunu var mı diye bakmak üzere Word Rich test ve BPG test gerçekleştirdik ve herhangi bir soruna rastlamadık modelimizin sonucundan. Sol tarafta modelimizin bize verdiği sonuçları görüyoruz. Ve çıkan sonuca göre aslında sigortalı istihdam ve imalat çalışanı, banka kredisi tutarı, ihracat tutarı, Ar-Ge merkez sayısı ve patent başvuruları teşvikli yatırımların bölgesel dağılımını anlamlı düzeyde ve olumlu etkileyen faktörler diyebiliriz. Yani ekonomik ve beşeri sermaye, aynı zamanda da teknolojik gelişmişlik bizim teşvikli yatırımların bölgelere dağılımında etkili olduğunu anlamamızı sağladı. Son olarak da çalışmamızı değerlendirip bazı öneriler sunduktan sonra sonuçumuzu tamamlıyorum. Dediğimiz gibi Türkiye'nin doğusunda yer alan az gelişmiş olarak nitelendirilen illerin batıdaki gelişmiş iller arasındaki gelişmişlik farkı uzun zamandan beri var ve hala da sürmekte maalesef. Bu gelişmişlik sorununa yönelik devlet bölgesel teşvik uygulamaları aslında müdahale aracı kullanıyor. Yani az gelişmiş bölgelere teşvik çekerek gelişmişlik farklarını azaltmayı hedefleniyor. Ancak sonuçta da gördüğümüz gibi 2009 ve 2019 yılları arasındaki teşvikli yatırım tutarlarının dağılımını incelediğimizde aslında durumun hedeflenenden tam tersi olduğunu tespit ettik. Yani sunulan tüm teşviklere rağmen gelişmiş bölgeler hala yatırımların odağında ve bunu etkileyen de sosyoekonomik gelişmişliği biz aslında ampirik analizimizle doğrulamış bulunduk. Bu durumun başlıca sebepleri bizce bölgelerin kendi potansiyelini ortaya çıkaracak teşvik sunulmaması, böyle bir teşvik sisteminin geliştirilmemesi ve öncelikli sektör teşvikleriyle bölgesel teşvik sisteminin dışına çıkılarak belirli sektörlere yönelik yatırımların yine gelişmiş bölgelerde toplanması. Yani örnek veriyorum, ben bir yatırımcı olarak orta yüksek teknolojide bir yatırım yapacaksam, ben bunu 1. bölgede yapsam da 5. bölge desteği aldığım için tabii ki de 5. bölgede yapmak yerine yine gidip 1. bölgede yapıyorum. Ve bu da aslında bölgesel teşvik sistemine tamamen zıt bir durum oluşturuyor. Yani bölgesel teşvik sisteminin dışına çıkılıyor. Bu durumlardan dolayı yatırım teşvik sistemiyle ilgili Türkiye'de bir düzenleme gerekliliği var. Ve bu problem bizce bölgelerin potansiyelini ortaya çıkaracak teşvik sistemi düzenlemeleriyle çözümlenebilir. Ve bu düzenlemeler Türkiye'nin cari açığa dayalı büyümesinin önüne geçecek, üretim artışı ve markalaşmayı sağlayarak bölgesel kalkınmayı da destekleyecek ürün bazlı teşvik sisteminin geliştirilmesiyle gerçekleşebilir diye düşünüyoruz. Bizi dinlediğiniz için de teşekkür ederiz. Sonuçumuz bu kadar.
Çok teşekkür ederiz Gamze'ye. Gamze'ye sorularınız varsa lütfen chat'i kullanarak yazabilirsiniz. Oturumun sunumların sonunda yapacağız, tartışmaya açacağız. Okay, thank you very much. And we are continuing with the second paper. Second paper will be presented by Amit Batabian. The title of his paper is City and Regional Demand for Vaccines, How Supply Arises from Competition in a Bertrand Duopoly. Amit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tuzin. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
No,
Yes.
we can't.
We can see you, not your screen.
Oh, let's try this another way. How about now?
Yes, it's working now, yeah.
Okay, good now? So Tuzin, can you let me know when I have only 5 minutes left?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so welcome everyone, marhaba. My name is Amit Batabial, and I work at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and this is joint work with Hamid Baladi, who works at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So as the title suggests, this is a paper about vaccine demand, obviously a very hot topic during these days of COVID-19, and the nature of vaccine supply when that supply comes about as a result of competition between firms in a so-called Bertrand duopoly. So I'm basically going to tell everybody a story here of what we try to do in this particular paper, because the paper itself is theoretical. It's a game theoretic analysis of competition. So there's a lot of mathematics. And so since I only have 15 minutes, I'm only going to focus on the story so that you come away with a sense for what we're trying to do in this paper, rather than get bogged down in the details of the mathematics. If you're interested in the details, please send me an email and I'll send you the paper so you'll have access to the paper that way. Okay, so many governments throughout the world have poured a lot of money into vaccine development, and vaccines have been seen to be one key way in which we can fight the coronavirus. Okay, now of the different kinds of vaccines that have been developed thus far, the evidence shows that the two best vaccines are based on new technology, the so-called messenger RNA or mRNA vaccines that have been developed by two firms, Pfizer in the United States in cooperation with BioNTech in Germany, that's Pfizer consortium, and Moderna, another firm based in the United States. Now, despite the fact that vaccines are very important, and we have seen thus far that they have been very important throughout the world in preventing the spread of this COVID-19, there is basically no theoretical research in the regional science literature that studies how economic circumstances, and there are two economic circumstances that we're going to be looking at in this paper: uncertainty about cost of production and change in the nature of strategic competition between firms, how these two things impact the incentives that firms face to first undertake research and development in the context of vaccine development. So given the lack of theoretical research in regional science on these topics, what we do in this particular paper is to construct and study a one-period model of an aggregate economy that is made up of cities and regions that are demanding the vaccine, and the supply of the vaccine is coming from competition between firms. And you should think about the competition that we're modeling in this particular paper as competition between, say, Moderna and Pfizer. Those are the two firms that have been producing the mRNA vaccines, and we're going to model that competition as a Bertrand game between these two particular firms. So there are two specific tasks that we focus on in the paper. First, study the impact that risk, uncertainty about whether R&D will yield positive results or not, what does that do to supply? And secondly, what does increased competition between these two firms do to affect the incentives to conduct R&D, that is research and development, in the first place? Okay, so think about an economic activity in a single time period that consists of a bunch of regions, if you like, cities and regions that demand the vaccine. And there are two firms, A and B, and these two firms are providing the vaccine. Now, it's important to understand that in this particular paper of ours, the vaccine is a homogeneous good. That is essentially the same good. And the reason why that assumption makes sense, because like I said, for Pfizer and Moderna, you can think of the mRNA vaccine as essentially the same good, all right? So if, for instance, I don't know whether this is true in Turkey, but at least in the United States, these two vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna ones, are easily interchangeable. So you can take one dose of one vaccine and a second dose of the other. They're interchangeable. And that's the homogeneous good assumption that we have. Now, of the two firms, the marginal cost of production is drawn from a uniform distribution with this particular domain. And this is the domain from which the marginal cost for firm A is drawn, and there is a corresponding uniform distribution from which the marginal cost of production for firm B is drawn. So both firms first observe their cost, and then they decide what price to charge for their product, which, like I said, you should think of as a mRNA vaccine. Now, the total demand for vaccines in this particular aggregate economy is made up by this linear demand function. That is, total demand depends on price, and it depends on this particular constant, about which we'll come to later. Then we come to pricing. So the intellectual question that we're interested in answering is, what will be the nature of pricing by these two firms in the Bertrand competition? Now, to begin to answer this particular question, you think about the two pricing decisions. First, let's focus on the firm that has the lower cost. Okay, so here are the two distributions, uniform for firm A, uniform for firm B. So there is a draw on the marginal cost. So one of the marginal costs is going to be lower. So whichever is the lower cost firm, let's focus on that and ask, well, will this firm engage in monopoly pricing or will it engage in limit pricing? Now, you can show with analysis that the monopoly price is given by equation 3. It's this particular expression. And you can also show, details are in the paper, that monopoly pricing does not make sense in the context of this model, because the firm that tries to charge a monopoly price, its rival can undercut this price by charging some epsilon, some very small amount, and still make positive profit. So as far as pricing is concerned, the first result we have is that there will in fact be no monopoly pricing, but there will be a so-called limit pricing equilibrium. So what is true at the limit pricing equilibrium? So for instance, suppose the cost realization of firm A is lower than the cost realization of firm B, then firm B, of course, charges C sub B in the equilibrium, and charging any more cannot make any sense. And the equilibrium limit price that we care about is given by this particular expression. And what happens in this particular market is the lower cost firm captures the entire market for vaccines. So result number one is there is no monopoly pricing, there is limit pricing, and whichever firm has the lower cost, that firm captures the entire market for vaccines. What about profits? Well, to compute the two profit functions, we first have to realize that because the marginal cost of production is stochastic, uncertain, we're interested in expected profits. Okay, so the expected profits that we're going to be computing depend on the two possible cases that we have to analyze. So the two cases are here. So this is the first case where the marginal cost of firm A is higher than B, and here's the second case where it's smaller than B. Now, again, you can do the analysis and the details are in the paper. And depending on these two cases, there are two possible expressions for cost, profit. That's given by equation 8 and equation 10. Okay, so what I've shown you thus far is the analysis for firm A. Now, firm B's problem is very symmetric to firm A's, so there is not much analysis that needs to be done. You're going to basically get an identical set of conditions. Everywhere you replace the subscript A with subscript B, that gives you what the limit pricing and profits are going to be for firm B. Now we come to the first key part of the paper, R&D. Now, R&D, research and development by either firm, is risky. Okay, you don't know whether you will succeed in terms of coming up with a new innovative product when you conduct R&D, and hence the R&D process is inherently risky. So suppose both the firms in our model begin competition and their cost distribution is this particular interval between 0 and C hat. Now, in principle, both firms in our model can do R&D if they're willing to undertake a fixed cost that is given by zeta. And then if they engage in R&D, then with some positive probability theta, this cost distribution is going to change from 0 C hat to 0 C hat minus beta, and beta is some positive number. So this way of modeling the cost distribution should be interpreted like we point out here. So the cost distribution basically changes. And how does it change? So the firm that is more successful in coming up with an innovation basically lowers the cost of producing vaccine. So this distribution, the right endpoint, moves closer to 0. That's the way in which we're saying that this amounts to a lowering of the cost of vaccine. Okay, cost of producing the vaccine. Okay, now the decision about whether to conduct R&D must be made before the firms realize what their actual cost is going to be. So the firm will engage in R&D, then maybe it will be successful, maybe it'll fail, and as a result, we're going to get an ex ante profit expression. So there are 4 possible scenarios to look at. Pi 0, 0, pi 1, 0.
Amit.
Okay, thank you, Tuze. Pi 1, 0, pi 0, 1, and pi 1, 1. So this is the expected profit to the first firm where they both try to do R&D, both fail. This is the expected profit when both try to do R&D and they both are successful. This is the case where the first firm is successful, the second firm fails. Here, the first firm fails and the second firm is successful. So there are these four possible profit expressions, and we can write them down numerically in these four equations. And so what we're confronted with is a static game between these two firms, where each firm has a strategy, either do R&D, that's R, or don't do R&D, and that's D. And as a result of undertaking these two actions, there are these different payoffs. Numerically, these payoffs can be written by these following four equations. And once we have these four equations, we then can look at the Nash equilibrium of this particular game. So the question is, what kind of equilibrium will emerge? And there are two possibilities. One is a symmetric equilibrium in which both firms behave the same. In other words, both firms do R&D or neither one do R&D. So that's here and here. But there is also a so-called asymmetric Nash equilibrium in which one firm conducts R&D, but the other firm does not. So the result from this risky R&D section is that there is in fact a symmetric Nash equilibrium with both firms engaging in R&D and an asymmetric Nash equilibrium where only one firm engages in R&D. Finally, the last part of the paper, increased competition. Well, we're modeling increased competition by a decrease in C hat. That is, this right endpoint of the cost distribution becomes smaller. So what happens when you increase competition between these two firms? Again, there is a lot of mathematical analysis that we can go to, but since I only have, what now, maybe 3 minutes, let me give you what the basic result is. So increased competition between these two firms generates a particular result, and that result is basically here. What we see is that when the competition between these two firms becomes more intense, of the asymmetric and the symmetric kinds of Nash equilibrium that are possible, the most likely scenario is an asymmetric Nash equilibrium in which only one firm does R&D and gives rise to a potentially innovative new product, in this case a vaccine, and the other firm basically does not engage in R&D because this decision is not profit maximizing for this particular firm. So increased competition basically gives rise to an asymmetric Nash equilibrium in which only one firm engages in R&D. So let me conclude by saying that what we study in this particular paper, as best as we can tell for the first time in regional science, is what is the nature of the vaccine supply decision when the supply is being conducted by two firms, example, Pfizer and Moderna. And we then looked first at their pricing strategies, computed their ex-ante profits, and allowed both firms to do risky R&D. So when you allow both firms to do risky R&D, there are two kinds of equilibria: a symmetric equilibrium in which both firms engage in R&D, and an asymmetric one in which only one firm engages in R&D. So we use this result to study the impact of increased competition and then show that the most likely result in this particular scenario is where only one firm engages in R&D and then comes up with a successful product. Of course, there are many extensions possible. One useful extension would be to study what the implication of an advance purchase agreement is. So when the government tells a particular firm, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna, if you produce 1 billion doses of vaccine successfully, we promise to buy this from you. So if you have an advance purchase agreement from a government, then that reduces the negative impact of the uncertainty that you face in terms of costs. So that's one possible extension. And the second possible extension is to study the scenario in which governments give explicit subsidies to firms if they're willing to enter the market for vaccines and try to come up with a new vaccine. So these would be two possible extensions. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Tuzin.
Thank you very much, Amit. Please write your question using chat, and we will discuss it at the end of the session. Now I would like to go immediately to our third presentation. Valentin Berlichko will present this paper. His title is Culture Industries in China's Gansu Province Regional Growth Challenges. Valentin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My point, theme of my paper is the culture industries in China's Gansu province, and which regional growth challenges the province faces. Gansu province is an important birthplace of the Chinese nation and Chinese civilization, an ancient Silk Road of territory from east to the west. And it includes 4 ancient civilizations of China, India, Greece, and Islam blend and intersect in Gansu Dunhuang historical place. So the culture industries of Gansu province center on adopting to the new development stage, implementing new development concepts, building new development patterns, and seizing policy opportunities like the famous Belt and Road Initiative or One Belt and One Road strategy, and the new round of the implementation of this state-level Western China development strategy. The scale of Gansu province economy is rather huge. The regional GDP of the smallest province already exceeded 1 trillion yuan in the year 2020. However, its development dynamics seems still moderate. Average increase is only 5.3% in the 2 years, which is lower than the national average of 6.4%. So this is the growth issue. The structure of Gansu province economy remains very traditional. The primary industry still plays very significant role. Despite the Gansu province is one of the important cultural province of the country, but the primary industry still is increasing in very high speed. For example, the added value of primary industry was 10.1% over the previous year, and the production and supply of electricity, heat, gas, and water increased by 12% or even 13%. So it means that the structure of industry in the province is still relatively obsolete. Now we have a look at the tertiary industry, where the culture industry is an important part of the tertiary industry complex.
Valentin,
yes.
I'm sorry for interruption, but
yes.
Do you have some slides? If you have, we cannot see them.
Oh, okay.
Are you sharing your slides?
Yes, I have, but I can put it on, you know, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
So just
We couldn't see your, can you share screen?
sorry?
Can you share screen?
Share screen, sorry. Share screen, think.
So if you have some slides, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there will be a green symbol which says share screen. That's the button you would press on.
This one, right?
Share screen at the bottom.
Mhm.
Yes. Is it?
There we
Ah, yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
much
Yes,
better.
now
Yes.
we are seeing.
Sorry about it. Actually, the Belt and Road Initiative and Western China Development Strategy is a basis for culture industries development, and actually, the structure of the Gansu province economy still is traditional, and primary industry still plays a significant role. So is a great purpose and strategy objectives the province government faces with how to increase the productivity and to extend the diversity of the culture industries in such culture development province is a great issue. So government tries to implement his investment policy objectives to feed the needs of culture industries in the province. But in this course, the investment still focused on the more than on primary industries that cultural industries. So we can very occasionally say that the investment policy still is not a favor of the culture industries. If we have a look at the budget, public budget, revenue and expenditure, we can find out the disbalance too, because the ratio of the ratio of revenues and expenditures is in the favor of this expenditure. So the province is funded by the central government, and incentives, grants, and other measures are undertaken to keep the balance in order. I find out some papers from the Gansu Painting Academy. Started the expenditure and the revenues. In the year 2020, the general public budget fiscal expenditures was 6 million yuan, plus minus, yes, and the decrease 25.07%. It means that the academy was underfinanced, underpaid, and its budget became smaller, and appropriate expenditures, for example, on culture and media, were budgeted by 5.4 million yuan, which is at 94% of the budget of the previous year. So some projects in the academy were postponed to the next year to completion. However, the budget for wages and for health expenditures for academics became the same. For example, the expenditure for wages was 100% of the budgeted volume of wages. It's the same as the year before, and the health expenditure was the same as in former years. Meanwhile, the budget for purchase and operation and maintenance of the academy decreased by 43.6%, including those expenditures connected with the capital construction. Actually, capital construction in the academy is considered as the first. Sorry, I will hold in 5 minutes, okay? And
you
yes,
have 4
yes,
minutes.
4 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
So to the province try to secure growth of culture industries through the regional innovations. I will just name some projects which are viable and which will facilitate the development of culture industries in the province. The first is the construction of the Silk Road Culture Industry Belt and Yellow River Culture Industry Belt. 2 belts, and will allow the province to put some emphasis on in the culture industries development. The next project is a Huaxia Civilization Inheritance and Innovation Zone. The province also launched a number of parks, national level parks, including Dunhuang Cultural Industry Demonstration Park. And one more form is a pilot city. This province launched the construction of cultural consumption pilot cities to increase consumption among the population, to encourage them to buy more culture products. Therefore, this activity of the government investing in innovating projects in the sphere of culture industries will allow these industries to at least to keep the pace related the previous period and overcome the COVID-19 epidemic cause. The epidemic measures still have to government have to fight the epidemic until now, but these regional projects could facilitate the culture industry development under these adverse conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, please, you can write your questions on chat, and I'm immediately going to the last paper. Amit will present again this paper. And the title is the Tax Policy and Interregional Competition for Mobile Venture Capital by the Creative Class. Amit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tuzin. Okay, so again, you can see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's get started. So this is a completely different paper with another co-author, Sung-Jaek Yoo, who works in Sukmyung Women's University in Seoul, South Korea. Okay, so let's get started with the details of the paper. So some of you may have heard of the idea of a creative class, a concept that has been made popular by Richard Florida. And Richard Florida writes a lot of things, and he says a lot of things about the so-called creative class. But a key point that comes through if you look at his work over the last 20 years is that cities and regions that hope to prosper and do well in terms of promoting economic growth and development need to, says Florida, draw in and retain members of the creative class. Why? Because according to him, members of the creative class are the key drivers of economic growth and development. So if you're able to attract and retain these people in your city, or more generally in your region, then the chances that you will prosper and thrive economically are far higher than a strategy that does not pay any attention to the well-being of the creative class. Now, the idea that I want to pursue in this particular paper is that the creative class, of course, consists of many different groups of people, some more creative than others, obviously, some PhD electrical engineers, some medical doctors, but many of them are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who have new ideas about manufacturing or creating new goods that they would like to bring to market. But the problem that they face is that these entrepreneurs need venture capital in order to tangibly create the products that they would like to, which are in idea stage typically, and actually bring these ideas in terms of created products to market. Now, venture capital typically tends to be limited, and this venture capital, whether it's in Silicon Valley or in the eastern part of the United States or in other countries, venture capital is typically received as a result of a competitive process. So you can't just go to a venture capitalist and obviously ask for money. You have to convince the venture capitalist that your ideas, whatever it is that you're trying to promote, are worth investing in, and only then will a venture capitalist provide the underlying resources to you. Now, even though it's well understood that entrepreneurial members of the creative class need access to venture capital to bring their ideas to fruition, there is a small literature that has analyzed the link between the creative class and the provision of venture capital. But the point that I would like to emphasize in this particular paper is that, as best as we can tell, there are no studies, in specific theoretical studies, that look at how tax policy affects the competition between creative class members that are located in different regions and who are competing for scarce venture capital. So what we do in this particular paper is look at an aggregate economy that consists of two regions and provide what we think is the first theoretical analysis of what tax policy would do, tax policy between different regions. What would this tax policy do in terms of either attracting or repelling venture capital, with the understanding that this venture capital is mobile, and of course this venture capital is being competed for between members of the creative class who are located in different regions. Now, to make the model specific, think about an aggregate economy that consists of two regions denoted by A and B. Okay. Now, creative class members, that is entrepreneurs who have new ideas for producing new things, are of course located in these two regions. And we suppose that a fraction, lambda sub A, lives in region A, the remaining fraction lives in region B. So obviously the two fractions have to sum to 1. Now, the total amount of venture capital that's actually available, say $100 million, $200 million, whatever the amount is in our aggregate economy, we suppose that it's fixed, and this makes sense because our analysis is static, and we suppose that it's normalized to 1. The creative class members who live in these two regions, A and B, they compete for this venture capital, and then it will be decided how much of this venture capital goes to region A and how much of it goes to region B. So if you want to think tangibly in kinds of what kinds of problems this paper might apply to, think about creative class members who are owners of startup companies, okay? And they're competing amongst themselves for scarce venture capital. To do what? To convert their ideas into tangible products, such as a camera, a laptop computer, or smartphone, things like that. Now, the production function that describes how the final good in each region is manufactured has two inputs, venture capital and creative capital. So creative capital is the capital that members of the creative class actually possess, according to Florida. And using these two inputs, venture capital and creative capital, a particular final good is produced. And the production function for producing this final good, we write in its intensive form, which is equation 1, where, for instance, Visa by is the venture capital per creative class member. So it's like a per capita capital labor ratio, except that what's in the numerator is venture capital and what's in the denominator is a creative class member. Okay. Now, with this particular production function in place, we suppose that production takes place competitively, which means that the two factors of production, venture capital and creative capital, are paid the value of their marginal product. Now, the available venture capital, of course, can move freely between regions A and B, and it's typically going to go to that region where returns to venture capital, which we describe by the net price or the cost of venture capital, zeta, is higher. Now, when we begin our static analysis in this particular paper, we assume that a representative creative class member in the ith region, and I equals either A or B, already has access to some venture capital, which we denote by V with a bar on top. Okay, so this is what they actually start the analysis with, but typically their starting amount is not going to be sufficient, and that's why they'd seek additional venture capital. Now, we have a regulatory authority in each of these two regions, A and B, and what this authority does is to tax the venture capital that's invested in this region at a rate tausa by, and as a result, the tax revenues that arise are a transfer to the representative creative class member in this region. Okay, so to sum up, we have a representative creative class member in region A, one in region B. They're competing for venture capital, and a regulatory authority in each of these two regions is taxing the receipt of venture capital. Now, what is the objective of this particular regulatory authority in each of these two regions? Well, this authority's objective is to maximize the net income of the representative creative class member who happens to live in this authority's region. So that net income expression can be written like this. So our first objective is to derive the so-called first best taxes in our aggregate economy. Now, what does this mean? First best means that the regulatory authority takes the entire aggregate economy into consideration. Okay, so this is income in region A, this is income in region B, and big Y or capital Y is the sum of these two regions. So the first best taxes take into account the welfare, if you like, of the entire region into account, not just an individual region. So far we're looking at a benevolent social planner-like approach who is trying to figure out what should the taxes be if I'm interested in maximizing aggregate income. Okay, so there is a detailed derivation procedure, which I'm not going to get into. We first have a market clearing condition to deal with. Then we have an arbitrage condition to deal with. And once you work through these two conditions, you can write the aggregate or total income as shown in equation 12. So as you can see that this is a bit of a complicated expression. It depends on the production function in each of these two regions. It depends on the taxes, tau sub A, tau sub B, but you can write total or aggregate income as equation 12. Okay, so what do you want to do? You want to maximize the total income with respect to the two tax rates, tau sub A and tau sub B. So that gives you two equations, 13 and 14, in two unknowns. So mathematically, if you have two equations and two unknowns, you should be able to solve for these two equations to get the two unknowns. But strangely enough, the surprising result that we have here is that when you try to solve for the two tax expressions, tau sub A and tau sub B, what you find is that they cancel out from these two conditions. So what does that tell us in plain English? Well, the optimal values of the two tax rates are undefined. Why do we get this strange result? Well, this happens because there's a fixed amount of venture capital in our aggregate economy. And what taxation does is to simply reallocate the amount of this fixed venture capital between the two regions A and B. Moreover, the revenue that arises from taxation is simply a transfer from the owners of venture capital to the taxing authorities in these two regions. So what this tells us is that any pair, repeat, any pair of tax rates that do not distort the allocation of venture capital, that means any pair of taxes that satisfy these two conditions simultaneously will be optimal regardless of the actual level. So the first best taxes are going to be the solutions to those two conditions, and any pair of these first tax rates will do. We don't particularly care about the actual level. Okay. All right, now let's move to actual inter-regional competition. Now, as a prelude to doing that, we first have to come up with an expression for the net price of this mobile venture capital, which we denote by zeta. Again, now, the price of anything is typically given by the interaction of two forces, one of demand and the other of supply. So we can use that to come up with an expression for the net price zeta of venture capital. That's given by equation 19. And as you can see, the net price of venture capital is negatively related to the two tax rates tau sub A and tau sub B. Now, why is this? Let's try to understand this intuitively. So let's focus on region A. If I increase the tax on venture capital, then that means it's more costly to receive this venture capital. If it's more costly to receive this venture capital, then the demand for something that is more costly will decline. And all else being equal, when the demand falls, the price of anything typically tends to go down. That's why we have this negative relationship between the two taxes and the net price of venture capital. Okay, now using that price expression that we just computed, meaning this particular expression, we can write down the representative creative class members' income using this net price. Now, as you can see, that's given by equation 21, and the relationship between income and the net price is, of course, positive. So all else being equal, if the net price of venture capital that you have goes up, then your income also goes up. So using this expression, we now want to study what would happen in the case of explicit inter-regional competition. So what do the optimal regional taxes look like? Well, again, there's an optimization problem to solve, and then that gives rise to this tax expression here in equation 25. So what is the sign of this tax that we have here in equation 25? Well, the denominator is obviously positive because lambda is some number between 0 and 1. And if you look at the numerator here, the sign basically depends on the sign of this particular term. So let's understand that in English. So V bar I is the amount of venture capital that you started the analysis with. V bar, on the other hand, is what you attract into your region as a result of interregional competition. So if this sign is positive, that means you are a net exporter of venture capital. And if you are a net exporter of venture capital, then the optimal tax here is negative in sign. That means tau is not really a tax, it's a subsidy. On the other hand, if you are a net importer of capital, meaning if this is negative in sign, then the tax that is optimal for you to implement is in fact a true tax, meaning it's positive in sign. So what the tax ends up being in interregional competition. Can you come to
conclusion, Amit?
Okay, so give me 2 minutes, I'll finish.
Okay.
Depends on the sign of this particular term. Okay, so where you start the analysis with, the initial condition matters, and whether you are a net exporter or a net importer also matters. So we then demonstrate the working of our model for actual numbers to do some numerical analysis. So using these numbers, we come up with two best response functions for the two taxes. Here is the picture. And of course, we want to solve for this equilibrium right here. And the equilibrium for this example is given by a positive tax for region A and a negative tax for region B. So we have these two taxes that are of opposite signs. And what we want to ask ourselves now is this result purely a function of the numbers that we assumed in this particular case, or is this more generally true? So What we show in the last part of the paper is that the two tax expressions can be given by this particular equations, 30 and 31. And the key thing is they both cannot be net exporters, and they both, that is both regions, cannot be net importers of venture capital. So this particular sign here and this particular sign is going to be positive for one region and negative for the other region. So the general finding in our model is that because this sign cannot both be positive or both be negative, because there are only two regions, the two taxes must be of opposite signs. So to conclude, what we look at in this particular paper is how tax policy affects the competition for mobile venture capital in an aggregate economy of two regions. We derived the first best taxes, then the net price of mobile venture capital, and then looked at the inter-regional competition-based taxes and showed that they were typically of opposite sign depending on whether a region was a net exporter or an importer. There are many extensions possible, of course. One possible extension would be to analyze this interaction in a dynamic scenario, not in a static scenario, or to consider a case where the venture capitalists in the two regions have access to asymmetrically held information. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit. Thank you. Okay, now we have time for a general discussion. And I think there was a question in chat or some comments for Gamze. Ibrahim Tuğrul Çınar gave some comments, and Gamze, would you like to answer? Maybe would you like to say something about those comments? Mikrofonun kapalı Gamze.
Kapalı Gamze hocam.
Pardon. Teşekkür ederim İbrahim. Ben zaten chatten yazdım hocam. Hani ekstra bir söyleyeceğim yok. Görüş sunmuş zaten. Teşekkür ederim görüşler için.
Peki, teşekkür ederiz. Any other question to presenters or comment? Okay. Yeşim Hoca, do you have a question? We cannot hear you.
Mikrofonu açık ama.
Tamam.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a question to Amit regarding his first presentation. It was very interesting, game theory version. I teach game theory in undergraduate, so it was very interesting for me. So that was a theoretical model. I want to ask your opinions about what is happening. In Turkey, we have Sinovac and BioNTech, Chinese and German vaccines. In the United States, you have the other ones. But what can you say about around the world, about all your theoretical foundations? How do they apply to the practical, to the world produced vaccines in today?
Right. So thank you for that question. So what I would say from the considerations, if we were to look at the entire world and not just the rich countries of the world, then typically if governments want to ensure that the vaccines are accessible to as large a group of people, then one of the best ways to encourage this is to construct what I said towards the very end of our paper, an advance purchase agreement. Now, the reason why pharmaceutical companies, not just in the context of vaccines, in the context of all medicines, the reason why they're often risk averse to come up with R&D and products that will be widely sold in poor countries, but not in rich countries, is because they are worried about two things. One, they don't know whether their R&D will be successful. Two, whether they will be able to charge a price that will enable enough sales to generate a profit from it. Now, if the governments tell these pharmaceutical companies in advance that if you conduct R&D and come up with a vaccine, say, for example, Monkeypox is something that people are talking about now, or smallpox or something like that. If you come up with a successful vaccine, we promise to buy 1 billion doses in advance. So an advance purchase agreement reduces the uncertainty associated with R&D in a significant way. So that would be one good way of promoting the creation of vaccines that can then be widely sold across the world and not just to rich countries. A second way in which you can do that, and here you would need participation from some of the richer countries, is to explicitly grant subsidies. So instead of coming up with an agreement, you could subsidize these firms and say, okay, this is what we need. We need a vaccine for this particular disease. If you can come up with something that is successful, then we will subsidize you to the tune of whatever, $10 billion, $20 million, something like that. So the key to making sure that vaccines are widely available is to get these pharmaceutical firms to actually do the research and development. And the way they will do research and development is if you remove some of the cost uncertainty that they face. Will I be successful? Will I be able to generate enough sales? Will I make money? So that's what you're trying to reduce with either subsidies or advance purchase agreements.
Okay.
You're muted.
Thank you very much, Amit.
Thank you.
It's okay, Yeşim Hocam?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes,
Thank you.
it's very
You're welcome.
interesting.
Teşekkür.
Teşekkürler.
Any other question? So I have a question. It's maybe a little bit beyond your papers. My question, both Amit and Valentin, you can answer. Maybe you can share your thoughts about it. Amit, you referred to Richard, Florida, but it's more than 20 years ago, and in the last 20 years, many things have changed, especially in the last few years. So nowadays, many creative class members, they are working as freelancers. And then they are using also internet very widely. They are entrepreneurs, but they are using internet sources. And then recently we have observed some new challenges regarding metaverse. And then NFT, so everybody, all artists and creative class members, they are trying to create their own NFT, and then they are investing also in metaverse. So how do you see the future of the creative class, also from the perspective of the venture capital and taxes, for example? There are so many uncertainties and unknown things there, but we are going to a different world now. What do you think about the rise of creative class and the creative industries and those kind of challenges, metaverse, NFT, and many other things, and the use of internet? What is your opinion about that?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, and there are lots of things that can happen. So let me answer with the caveat that the pandemic has created a lot of uncertainty in terms of the work environment in general, not only in the United States, I'm sure in Turkey and in many other countries of the world. So things are quite unsettled. But one of the clear implications of the way in which things are evolving right now for venture capital in the context of the creative class is the following. Earlier on, before the pandemic, if you had a new idea which you were trying to market and get money to develop into a new product, you actually had to be physically close to where the venture capitalists are. So for instance, if it's a tech-related idea, technology-related idea in the United States, that generally meant you had to be in the Silicon Valley area, or in Seattle where Microsoft is, or in a small corridor on the east, just south of Boston. You had to physically be where the action was taking place. But given your question and what we now see in the midst and in the aftermath of the pandemic is that the necessity for being physically close or physical proximity is no longer important anymore. You can, for instance, tap into or access money in Silicon Valley or anywhere in the country with ideas. You don't have to be physically located there. Because of advances in communication technology, particularly information and communication technologies, you can access venture capital with interesting and good ideas from anywhere in the world. So that's one obvious implication. Physical proximity to where the action is no longer an issue in the way it once was previously. The second way in which I would respond is that because of the presence of new technological opportunities for many of these particular firms and individuals, you talked about investment in metaverse or the creation of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, there is a certain kind of uncertainty in terms of who actually is a member of the creative class. Richard Florida has a definition, and one of the key things that he said, which attracted a lot of attention, is that economists are wrong when they focus on human capital only, because human capital typically relies on many years of formal schooling. But there are these groups of people, poets, artists, dancers, musicians, etc., who are very creative, but they don't necessarily have any kind of access to schooling. So you cannot say that these people don't contribute anything to the economy just because they don't have PhD degrees or master's degrees. So that was the additional group of people he brought into the analysis. Now, with ICT improvements, that definition is being expanded even more so, because now you have, in principle, 18-year-old high school students or people with just 1 or 2 years of college. As long as you can code effectively, you can market and sell products of your own or actually work for other entities by providing software services. So that's changing the definition of who actually is in the creative class. And when you combine this with the fact that physical proximity is no longer necessary to access venture capital, that's giving a completely different meaning to what regional economic growth and development policies actually ought to be going into the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Amit.
You're welcome.
And Valentin. Valentin, by the way, your microphone unmute.
Yeah. I just would to refer to Chinese experience and to support everything now Mr. Amit told to us. In China, culture industries, how to say, to development focus was mainly attention was paid to the culture clusters and culture, how to say, the zones. So the proximity, spatial proximity was on place. Cluster was consisted from university, cultural entity, and in a local place, a limited territory. Zone, it was a little bit looser, but I mean loose territory, more spacious. But now China started, and the Gansu province is an example, started to set up much more sizable territorial units like corridors. In Gansu province, the Dunhuang Culture Corridor, it longs more than 1,000 kilometers. So it is in the city, also consumption model cities, the population exceed 6 million people. So there are no need now to have a close proximity of culture, research, development, and production facilities. It is based, of course, on the internet and IT options. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, Valentin, I couldn't see your first slide, but are you from Ukraine?
Yes.
Where are you now?
I'm the capital city, Kiev.
Okay, okay. Hope all is well and you are safe there. And we wish this war will end up as soon as possible.
Thank you. We will try.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I would like to second that. This unjust aggression needs to be stopped. I wish Ukrainians all the best.
Yeah.
And as you know, the United States is supporting you in a big way.
Sure. Thank you. We
Yeah.
will do our best. Thank you.
Thank you very
Very
much,
good.
Valentin. And Amit, thank you so much for joining us from the United States. There is a 7-hour difference, and then it was 6 a.m. in the United States. So we appreciate very much your contribution, your participation to our Congress, to our session. Thank you so much. Take care and all the best to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Tuzin. It was good to see you again.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We can finalize our session now.
Our next sessions will start 2:30, and I'm closing the recording.